In this session, I want to talk about plumbing, particularly as it applies to water in your tiny house. We're going to talk about the path of the water through your tiny house, little on how to and the choices to go there, and then we'll go through various fixtures and items to think about with your own fixtures. So this is not going to be a how to put pipes together. For that, I suggest that you buy a plumbing book that will go over all of the means and methods to how to put, plumbing together, what fittings to use, how to do that appropriately. I want you to keep in mind that these plumbing books kind of really comprehensive, and a tiny house is very basic. So they may be 300 pages and you're going to use 30 of them, so keep that in mind. It's a lot of information, but tiny houses are about as basic as they could be in most of their systems. So when we're talking about the water, I'm going to go over the filter, water heaters, sinks, shower, bath, washer, dryer, dishwasher, toilet. We'll start off initially with how to get water to your tiny house. And so in doing that and getting water to your tiny house, you have options. Like with all systems of a house, you have these in a standard house as well, but it's kind of more traditional. It's like if you're in a city, you're tied to the city. If you're not, then you're self-contained. But with a tiny house, you have all of the same options and you see a lot more variety. So with water, you can choose to be off-grid, where you're carrying in your own water, you're using gravity-fed appliances, or you can be self-contained, where you maybe drill your own well and your water comes on site from you. You do your own testing and whatnot, or you can be tied to the city grid. There's nothing that says one way is better than the others. It's all personal preference. So when you're dealing with plumbing in a tiny house, you have two systems. You have your supply lines, where you're getting water into your house, and then you have your drain and vent lines, where the water is draining out, and to help it drain out so you don't get a vacuum and you don't get smells backing up, you have a vent system tied to that drainage. Generally vented out your roof. Some people have a real preference and say it shouldn't go out the roof, it should go out the side of the wall. There's two reasons I suggest that the roof is a better location, and that is, for me personally, I think it's easier to flash a roof vent than a sidewall vent. You're not dealing with gravity as an extra, force over time. And then not only that, with tiny houses, you're limited on your width size. And if you pop something out a sidewall, you either have to remove that in transit or calculate that into your width. So personally, I think the vent pipes make more sense going out of a roof. Tie them all together where you only have one roof penetration, but you can do it both ways. So getting water to your house, this is if you're not carrying in water, you can definitely use 5-gallon buckets all day long, but you can also hook up water directly to your house using, a well or city hookup. Most people use a potable lawn hydrant, and a lawn hydrant is it's like a hose fixture, but it connects to the water way underground below the frost line of your region. Like for Idaho, my part of Idaho, we have a 2-foot frost line. So it connects 2 foot below water or below ground so that in the winter it doesn't freeze. And if you shut it off, it shuts off the water down underground so it doesn't break pipes. So definitely use a potable lawn hydrant. And then, obviously you don't just shut the water off during winter. You need water then too. So if you have a cold region, you can buy what they call heat tape. And it's thermally controlled. So there'll be, a thermometer on it. And when it drops below, I think usually it's set about 34 degrees. If it gets to 34 degrees, it pops on. And you wrap your pipes with this heat tape and it'll stop it from freezing. You can also skirt your tiny house if all the water is underneath that and do insulated walls around the plumbing underneath your tiny house, which a lot of people do. And then to go from the lawn hydrant to your tiny house, You can either plumb it with PEX or something and enclose it somehow, or you can get a potable water hose. And it's really important to have a potable water hose rather than just a garden hose. Garden hoses do have chemicals in them. I know everybody's drank out of them when they were little kids, but having a drink, a couple days a year out of a garden hose is different than using it for your sole source of water. So make sure definitely that you get a drinking water hose, a potable water hose, to tie into your tiny house. If you choose to be off-grid, you can definitely collect your own rainwater, or you can store your own rainwater with various holding tanks. You do need to check your local codes. Water rights in this country are a real thing, and they are prosecutable in a lot of states. And I know it sounds silly, but a lot of states will not allow you to collect rainwater. That rainwater has to percolate into the ground and feed the irrigation systems. So definitely check your water rights locally before you opt to go this way. These are typically, you can get a pump and you can pump out of here, or you can do gravity fed. Holding tanks can be either above ground or underground. Kind of depends on how you're going to use your water in your water tanks. So when you're plumbing your supply lines for your tiny house, you've got a couple options. The standard is copper. For more years than not, people use copper to plumb their houses. And PEX is quickly becoming an easier and preferred method. So when you're plumbing, consider the ease of install for you personally. And then also, when you're in a tiny house on wheels, you're dealing with mobile and vibrations, and things might flex more than in a standard foundation house. So definitely consider those things. And we'll talk about copper here for a second. Like I mentioned, copper has been the standard. It's an antibacterial product naturally, so that's why it's kind of been chosen to run supply lines. It can be installed inside or outside, but if it freezes, water expands when it freezes, so it can burst a pipe if it is installed outside in cold weather. Keep that in mind. The cons of it is when you're soldering together copper pipe, it can sweat toxic materials. So be sure to flush your copper fittings really well before you use it. And then it also takes more skill and more tools to install because you're soldering pipes and cutting pipes exactly. And so it takes a little bit more to install, but it is standard. So you can find lots of people to do that plumbing in that way. PEX stands for cross-linked polyurethane. It comes in red and blue so that you can easily see which ones are the hot lines and which ones are the cold lines. It also just comes in white, which is fine too. Generally, it's 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch in a house. This kind of got popular because they used it, in the 80s for radiant heat in floor systems, and then somebody was kind of like, well, why don't we just use this for plumbing? It seems to work really well. And so it's food rated and everything. A lot of people are concerned that it's plastic and it's going to poison them over time, but it is rated for food and drinking, so that's not an issue. It is a lot cheaper than copper. It's roughly 1/3 the cost of copper. It is more resistant to freezing because the plastic can ebb and flow a little bit with different temperatures. Flexible is big to being able to work around other piping in the walls. You don't have to do everything 90-degree angles around. It doesn't lose heat. It's got some insulative properties, more so than the copper does, so it can travel further distance without losing as much heat, which is important if you're heating water, that you don't want to have to heat up the whole thing before you get hot water. And it's non-toxic. The drawback of it is that you cannot use it in direct sun. UV rays will destroy it over time, so careful about that. In general, I want to just show you the tools. It takes skill and fire to put copper together, where it takes a cutter and some clamps to put PEX together. The thing I do want to mention, the clamps for the PEX, the alligator clips or shark bites, whatever they choose to call them. When you're tightening them down, tighten them down all the way and then go a little bit further. There's a lot of people who've done PEX in their tiny house and they think they've sealed it up all great, and none of the shark bites were fully closed. It feels like you're done, and then you have to go a little bit further. Otherwise, those fittings will all pop off. And so there's been many stories of people who do shark bites connections in their tiny house, and then they run water and it all just comes apart. It's not a huge deal. I mean, it stinks, but you just put it all back together and you really clamp it down hard. All right, and then when it gets to vent lines, you've got the option between the white pipe and the black pipe. The PVC is the white type and the ABS is the black type. There's really no reason you can't use either. A lot of times this comes down to a preference of the plumber. They both use different types of glue. One uses a 2-part epoxy, and the other uses kind of a not 2-part epoxy. It's just a black glue. Plumbers generally have a preference for which one they like better. Right now, it comes down to costs. You know, initially you used PVC for vent pipes, and then it got to be expensive, and they came out with this ABS material that was supposed to be comparable, but it was cheaper. But now PVC is actually cheaper at this moment in time than ABS is. So it comes down to what you want to use. A lot of times it comes down to cost. Sometimes it comes down to glue, and it's either one of them are fine for vent lines. Vent and drain, sorry, I should say.